Welcome to Chapman Crime in Every Small Town. There are stories that were never supposed to be told, quiet disappearances, strange clues, and mysteries that still echo decades later. These are the ones that never let go. It was a warm July evening in 1908 when Hazel Drew set out for a walk along Taborton Road near Sand Lake, New York. She was young, beautiful, and independent, a 20-year-old woman with golden brown hair and bright blue eyes who worked as a maid for a wealthy family in Troy. By all accounts, Hazel was cheerful, smart, and well-liked. But behind that charm, there were whispers, secrets about the men she kept company with and the life she wanted to escape. When her body was found 4 days later, floating face down in Till Pond, those secrets became the heart of a mystery that has haunted the small town for more than a century. Her head had been crushed by a blunt object. Her face was bruised and swollen. She was still wearing the yellow straw hat she'd been seen with that night. In her pocket, police found only a few coins and a train timetable. Her shoes were missing. No one knew who had killed her or why. At first, investigators believed Hazel had simply fallen victim to a stranger on the dark country road. But her autopsy revealed she had been dead for 2 days before her body was found, suggesting she'd been moved. There were no signs of robbery or assault, only violence and silence. As detectives questioned those closest to her, they discovered a web of relationships that complicated everything. Hazel had reportedly been seeing several older men, including her former employer and a well-connected businessman. One witness claimed she'd been spotted with a man wearing a straw hat that night near the pond. Another said he'd heard angry voices echoing through the trees, a woman's cry, and then nothing. Newspapers turned her death into front-page drama. They printed sensational headlines about the pretty servant girl and a double life of deceit. Reporters swarmed Troy, painting Hazel as both victim and villain, a reflection of the era's cruel fascination with women who dared to live freely. Detectives chased dozens of leads, jealous lovers, secret pregnancies, local politicians, but every path ended in rumor. Weeks turned into months, and the case grew cold. Hazel's funeral drew hundreds of mourners. She was buried beneath a simple white stone in Gardner Cemetery. Her murder remained unsolved, her story unfinished. Decades later, the case would inspire Twin Peaks creator Mark Frost, whose grandmother once told him tales of the girl in the pond. Hazel became the real-life echo of Laura Palmer, the beautiful young woman hiding a secret life, whose death revealed the darkness beneath a quiet town. Even now, locals say that on warm summer nights, mist rises off Till Pond and the woods grow unnaturally still. Some claim to have seen a figure, a woman in a straw hat, walking along the edge of the water before vanishing into the trees. More than a century has passed, but the mystery of Hazel Drew endures. No confession, no conviction, only a haunting story of youth, secrets, and a life cut short on a lonely country road. On June 17, 1980, in Thornbury, a quiet suburb of Melbourne, 38-year-old Maria James was found brutally murdered in her small second-hand bookshop. She was a single mother, devoted to her 2 sons, Mark and Adam. That morning had begun like any other. Maria opened her shop on High Street, chatted with customers, and promised to meet her ex-husband later in the day. But by afternoon, everything changed. When her son Mark came home from school, he noticed the shop lights still on, the front door unlocked. Inside, he found his mother's body in the bedroom behind the counter. She had been stabbed 68 times. The attack was frenzied, personal, and silent. There were no witnesses, no forced entry, and almost nothing stolen. Detectives initially suspected a robbery gone wrong, but there was no money missing from the till. The crime scene told a different story. Maria had been ambushed from behind, and the killer had taken time to cover her with a quilt before leaving. Neighbors reported seeing a man leaving the shop just before noon, tall, dark-haired, wearing a blue jacket, but no one recognized him. As police dug deeper, they discovered that Maria had planned to confront a local Catholic priest that very morning. Her younger son, Adam, had told her something deeply troubling, something she intended to report, but she never got the chance. The priest was questioned but denied involvement. The church quietly distanced itself, and the case grew cold. For decades, the murder of Maria James haunted Melbourne. Then, in 2017, the ABC podcast Trace brought new attention to the case. Reporters uncovered evidence suggesting the priest Maria had planned to confront was later accused of child abuse. Even more shocking, DNA found at the crime scene, once thought to exclude him, had been mixed up with another sample. The revelation reignited public anger and reopened the investigation. Police retested the original evidence, but time had taken its toll. Some samples were too degraded to provide new answers. Mark and Adam, now adults, continued to seek justice for their mother. Their story has touched Australians everywhere, a reminder of how easily truth can be buried beneath silence and power. Maria's bookshop no longer stands, but the mystery remains. A mother's love, a secret too dangerous to tell, and a case that refuses to fade. October 22, 2003, Tina Watson, a 26-year-old newlywed from Alabama, was on her dream honeymoon in Australia with her husband of just 11 days, Gabe. They had planned a 2-week adventure that included scuba diving on the Great Barrier Reef, something Tina had always wanted to do. But within minutes of descending beneath the surface, the trip turned to tragedy. According to Gabe, the couple had been diving near the wreck of the Yongala, a popular but challenging site off Townsville. Tina struggled almost immediately. Gabe later told investigators that she panicked, her eyes wide, her arms flailing in the current. He claimed she knocked his mask loose and pulled at his regulator, causing him to ascend for air. When he turned back, Tina was sinking, motionless, toward the seafloor. Other divers saw her drifting downward, bubbles rising from her gear. A rescue diver brought her to the surface, but it was too late. Tina Watson was pronounced dead on board the dive boat. At first, it was ruled a tragic accident, an inexperienced diver overcome by fear and the ocean's power. But inconsistencies in Gabe's story quickly surfaced. His dive computer showed that he had ascended slowly and spent precious minutes near the bottom after Tina began to sink. He had not tried to share his air or bring her up. Witnesses recalled him acting strangely calm after the incident, even telling one crew member it was supposed to be a fun dive. Then came the life insurance policy, one Gabe had encouraged Tina to sign before their wedding. It was worth $130,000, naming him as sole beneficiary. Australian authorities reopened the case, classifying it as a potential homicide. Forensic experts recreated the dive, studying equipment failures, buoyancy levels, and even the direction of Tina's body as she fell. Their conclusion: her death was not consistent with panic or simple drowning. In 2008, Gabe Watson voluntarily returned to Australia and was charged with manslaughter. He pleaded guilty to negligent behavior, admitting he failed to assist his wife when she was in distress. He served 18 months in an Australian prison and was deported back to the US. But when he arrived home, Alabama prosecutors charged him again, this time with murder. That trial ended in 2012, when the judge dismissed the case due to lack of evidence. To this day, people remain divided. Some believe Tina's death was an accident, a tragedy of inexperience. Others insist the evidence points to something darker. Her parents have never stopped fighting for answers. Tina's father once said, "You don't go on your honeymoon, come back in a box." He still believes his daughter's final moments hold the truth, somewhere beneath the waves of the Great Barrier Reef. It was a quiet September night in 1949 when Dorothy Forstein tucked her children into bed at their Philadelphia townhouse. Her husband, Judge Jules Forstein, was away on business. By morning, Dorothy would be gone, vanished from her locked home without a sound. Dorothy was 40 years old, well-liked, and deeply devoted to her family. But she'd been living in fear for years. In 1944, she had been brutally attacked inside her home, struck unconscious by an unknown intruder. Her face was shattered, her jaw broken. The attacker was never caught. After months of recovery, she seemed to rebuild her life, but she never felt safe again. On the evening of September 8th, Dorothy attended a neighbor's dinner party with her 2 younger children. She returned home around 11 p.m., said goodnight to her babysitter, and sent the children to bed. Sometime later that night, her 8-year-old daughter, Marcy, woke to strange noises. Peering from her doorway, she saw something she would never forget. A man stood in the hall, carrying her mother's limp body over his shoulder. When Marcy asked what he was doing, he reportedly said, "Go back to sleep, little one. Your mother is fine." Then he walked out the front door. The next morning, the Forstein home was found locked from the inside. Dorothy's purse, keys, and coat were still there. There was no sign of forced entry, no footprints, and no ransom note. Police searched hospitals, morgues, and fields across Philadelphia. Nothing. It was as if she had simply been erased. Investigators questioned everyone, Neighbors, friends, even her husband, the judge. Rumors spread quickly. Some believed Dorothy had known her abductor and let him in. Others whispered that her earlier assault had been a warning, that someone powerful wanted her silenced. In the years that followed, the case grew colder. Judge Forstein was devastated. He told reporters, "I have lost everything that matters." He died in 1956, never knowing what happened to his wife. To this day, no trace of Dorothy has ever been found. Her children grew up haunted by that night, especially Marcy, whose childhood memory became the only clue in one of Philadelphia's strangest disappearances. The locked doors, the quiet street, and a mother carried into the dark, never seen again. On the morning of July 15th, 2015, a motorist driving along the Kurunda Highway near the small South Australian town of Vinarka spotted something strange on the roadside, an old, weather-worn suitcase sitting in the dust. When police opened it, they made a discovery that would haunt the nation. Inside were the skeletal remains of a little girl, along with children's clothes and a handmade patchwork quilt. For weeks, no one knew her name. There were no matching missing persons reports, no recent child disappearances, and no one came forward. The child became known only as Asterisk, the Vinarka girl. Detectives from South Australia, police's major crime branch, launched a nationwide investigation. They released photos of the suitcase and the quilt, hoping someone would recognize them. That image, a tiny, brightly colored quilt beside a battered case, spread across every newspaper and television screen in Australia. Then, in October 2015, Crime Stoppers received 2 anonymous calls that broke the case open. The quilt looked familiar. One caller said they believed it belonged to a young mother named Carly Pierce Stevenson, who had vanished years earlier along with her 2-year-old daughter Condoleezza Pierce. DNA testing confirmed it. The child in the suitcase was Condoleezza Kiara Pierce, born 2006. Her mother's remains had been found 5 years earlier in 2010, dumped in State Forest in New South Wales, the same forest once linked to backpacker killer Ivan Milat. At the time, police had no idea the unidentified woman found there was a missing mother or that her daughter was also gone. Now, the 2 cases were connected, a child in a suitcase in South Australia and a woman's body across the border in New South Wales. Detectives pieced together a timeline. The last confirmed sighting of Carly and Condoleezza was on November 8, 2008, when police pulled their car over near Coober Pedy. Soon after, both disappeared. Yet for years afterwards, someone kept using Carly's identity, withdrawing her money, claiming Centrelink benefits, and sending text messages from her phone. Friends even received messages pretending to be her, saying she was traveling or working interstate. Police eventually traced the deception to Daniel James Hold'em, Carly's former partner. In 2015, he was charged with both murders, and in November 2018, he was sentenced to 2 life terms with no chance of parole. Investigators believe he murdered Carly in late 2008, dumped her body in Belanglo Forest, and later killed Condoleezza to conceal his crimes. The Vinarka suitcase became the tragic symbol of the case, a reminder of a mother and daughter separated by distance, time, and unspeakable cruelty. Forensic officers said the discovery connected 2 of the most disturbing crimes in Australian history. Today, flowers still appear near the highway where the suitcase was found. A small plaque bears their names, Carly Pierce Stevenson and Condoleezza Kiara Pierce. After 7 years of questions, police finally answered the mystery, but nothing could undo the loss of 2 lives so young, and a story that still breaks hearts across Australia. On the morning of the 2nd of July 2016, 2 fishermen in East Fremantle, Western Australia, made a grim find, a suitcase floating in the tidal waters of the Swan River. Inside were the remains of 58-year-old artist and mother Annabelle Chun. Annabelle had lived quietly in the affluent suburb of Mosman Park, working as an artist and keeping to herself. Her body had been beaten. Forensic reports later determined she had suffered at least 25 separate blows to the head and face. Investigators soon learned the gruesome truth. Between the 30th of June and the 2nd of July 2016, Annabelle was murdered in her Mosman Park home. Then her body was placed in a suitcase, weighted down with ceramic tiles, and dumped into the river. The investigation pointed to two people, her ex-husband, Ping Ban, 67, and their daughter, Tiffany Wan, 27. Both were charged with murder and accessory. They each blamed the other during the trial. On the 5th of September 2018, the jury found Ban guilty of murder and Wan guilty of being an accessory after the fact. Ban was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 20 years. Wan received a lesser sentence for her role. The case revealed chilling details: a scooter modified with a timber breadboard used to transport the suitcase, ceramic tiles tied to Ban's former home, cell phone records tracking the movement of the pair, blood-stained surfaces in both the house and Ban's rental car. In the quiet suburb where she lived, neighbors describe Annabelle as Mrs. Invisible, private, spiritual, and distant. Yet behind her solitude lay vulnerability. The case became one of Perth's most shocking murders, a body in a suitcase on a river. Today, the spot beside the Swan River where the suitcase was pulled from stands quietly. Divers still search for further evidence. A wealthy life ended in betrayal and silence. Annabelle Chun was 58, her body discovered in a suitcase. And the man and daughter who carried the secret now carry the sentence. In August 2022, a family in Auckland, New Zealand, purchased the contents of an abandoned storage unit through an online auction. They were expecting household goods and old belongings. Instead, they found 2 suitcases, and inside them, the remains of 2 children. The discovery sent shockwaves through the country. Detective Inspector Tofalau Famanuia Varalua led the investigation, describing it as one of the most distressing cases New Zealand police had ever faced. The victims were eventually identified as Yuna Jo, aged 8, and Minu Jo, aged 6, siblings originally from South Korea. The children had lived in Auckland with their mother, Ha-Kyung Lee, before their deaths around mid-2018. Their remains had been sealed in suitcases and stored for years before the unit was eventually auctioned when payments lapsed. The family who bought the unit had no connection to the victims. Working with Interpol, detectives traced the children's identities through DNA and immigration records. They discovered that Ha-Kyung Lee had left New Zealand in 2018 and returned to South Korea shortly after her children's deaths. For nearly 4 years, the case went unnoticed. In September 2022, South Korean police located and arrested Lee in the port city of Ulsan following a global red notice. She was extradited to New Zealand in late 2022 to face 2 charges of murder. During her 2025 trial at Auckland's High Court, prosecutors alleged that Lee had killed both children inside their family home before concealing their remains. The cause of death has never been made public, but the coroner ruled both deaths as homicide. Lee denied the charges, citing mental illness and memory loss. After a lengthy trial, the jury found her guilty on both counts of murder. She was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 17 years. The case devastated 2 nations, South Korea, where the children were born, and New Zealand, where their lives ended. For the detectives who worked the case, it was personal. Many attended the sentencing, laying flowers outside the courthouse in quiet remembrance. 2 children, forgotten in time, rediscovered by chance, and a mother whose silence left questions that may never be answered. The Auckland suitcase murders remain one of the most haunting crimes in recent history, a reminder that even the darkest secrets eventually surface. Early December 1872, the North Atlantic was calm. The Canadian brigantine *De Gradia sighted another vessel drifting about 400 nautical miles east of the Azores. The ship's sails fluttered loosely, her course uncertain. Through a spyglass, Captain David Morehouse read the name painted on the stern, Mary Celeste. He knew that name. She had sailed from New York only a few weeks earlier, bound for Genoa, Italy. On board were Captain Benjamin Spooner Briggs, his wife Sarah, their 2-year-old daughter Sophia, and a crew of 7 experienced sailors. When the De Gradia sent a boarding party, they found no one. The Mary Celeste was completely deserted. The ship was still seaworthy, her hull intact, her cargo of 1,701 barrels of industrial alcohol untouched, and supplies for 6 months still below deck. The crew's clothing, tools, and navigation instruments were all in place. Only the lifeboat was gone. The last logbook entry, dated the 25th of November 1872, placed the ship about 100 miles west of where she was found. There were no signs of violence or panic. In the captain's cabin, a sewing machine sat on the floor beside a half-mended garment. Sarah Briggs's belongings were neatly stowed. Dinner had long since gone cold. What could make an experienced captain abandon a sound vessel in mid-ocean? At the Gibraltar salvage hearing that followed, every possible theory was examined. Piracy was ruled out, the ship's valuables were still aboard. Mutiny seemed unlikely, there was no struggle. Captain Briggs was known for his discipline and faith, not for rash decisions. One theory suggested the alcohol fumes leaking from the cargo hold might have caused the crew to fear an explosion. Perhaps they lowered the lifeboat temporarily, intending to return once the danger passed, but the tow line parted, leaving them stranded. Another idea was that heavy weather or a sudden waterspout flooded the decks, convincing Briggs the ship was sinking. Yet the hull showed no storm damage. Over time, stories grew wilder: sea monsters, alien abductions, even supernatural curses. But the truth remained painfully simple. Something frightened the crew enough to leave a ship that should have carried them home. The Mary Celeste herself survived, sold and resold for decades. Her reputation, though, was never the same. Sailors called her the cursed brigantine. She finally met her end in 1885 when her captain deliberately wrecked her off the coast of Haiti in an insurance scam. But it was that silent morning in 1872 that made her legend, a ghost ship adrift in the Atlantic, her wheel turning on its own, sails whispering in the wind. No sign of violence, no sign of life. Just the endless sea and a mystery that still refuses to sink. In the far northwest of Canada lies a vast and isolated region known as Nahanni National Park Reserve, a land of canyons, hot springs, and jagged limestone peaks. The local Dean people have long called it Techo, the Big River. To outsiders, it gained another name, the Valley of Headless Men. The legend began with a grim discovery in 1908. Two brothers, Willie and Frank McLeod, set out from Fort Liard to search for a rumored deposit of gold in the Nahanni Valley. They never returned. 2 years later, a search party found their camp deep in the valley and their skeletons, both missing their heads. No gold was ever found. No explanation was ever given. In 1917, another prospector, Martin Jorgensen, followed the same trail, convinced he could succeed where the McLeods had failed. His cabin was later found burned to the ground, his body inside also decapitated. By the 1940s, at least 4 other prospectors had vanished or been found headless in the same area. Mounties who investigated wrote in their reports that the terrain was treacherous, the river unpredictable, and the weather deadly. But none could explain why the heads were missing. To the Dean First Nation, the valley had always been sacred and dangerous. They spoke of Yadni, the mountain spirits, who protected the land and punished intruders. For generations, they warned travelers not to enter the deep gorges of the South Nahanni River. Scientists later suggested more earthly dangers. The valley's steep cliffs create powerful downdrafts that can turn campfires into infernos. Wildlife, grizzly bears, and wolves are known to scavenge remains, though even experienced trappers found it strange that skulls alone would disappear. Others blamed gold fever, greed, violence, and isolation driving men to kill for claims. Whatever the truth, the Nahanni region became a place of whispered stories. Maps began to mark it with a strange label, Headless Valley. Today, Nahanni National Park Reserve is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, breathtakingly beautiful, but still largely uninhabited. Modern explorers who paddle the South Nahanni River say the silence there feels heavy, as if the land itself remembers. Old mining gear, rusted and forgotten, still lies buried in the brush. And deep in the canyons, where the fog never quite lifts, locals say you can still feel eyes watching from the ridgelines. Over a century later, the mystery remains unsolved. The McLeod brothers, Martin Jorgensen, and others who followed them into the valley are long gone, their names carved into Canada's folklore. But the question that haunts Nahanni endures: what really happened to the men who lost their heads in the Valley of the Headless Men? It was a warm afternoon on May 26, 1828, when a teenage boy stumbled into the streets of Nuremberg, Germany. He could barely walk. His clothes were tattered, his feet blistered, and in his hand he carried a letter addressed simply to the captain of the 4th Squadron. The townspeople thought he was drunk or lost. When they spoke to him, he could say only a few words. His name sounded like Caspar Hauser. He kept repeating, "I want to be a cavalryman like my father," and horse, horse. No one knew where he'd come from. The letter said the boy had been raised in isolation by a mysterious man who had taught him only to read a few phrases and to pray. He had been kept in a dark cell for as long as he could remember, fed only bread and water, never seeing the world outside. Physicians examined him and confirmed he behaved like a child who had grown up without human contact, fascinated by simple objects, confused by crowds, and terrified of loud sounds. He seemed innocent, almost otherworldly. As his story spread, Europe became obsessed. Was he an abused orphan or someone far more important? Rumors began to swirl that Caspar Hauser was actually the missing heir to the powerful House of Baden, switched at birth so another child could inherit the throne. Nuremberg authorities gave Caspar a tutor, a kind teacher named Georg Daumer, who helped him learn to read, write, and speak. Caspar showed remarkable intelligence, but he also suffered sudden fits and paranoia, claiming someone was watching him. In 1829, less than a year after his arrival, an intruder broke into Daumer's home and struck Caspar on the head with a blade. He survived, but the attacker was never found. By 1833, Caspar was living in the town of Ansbach under the care of a local official when another tragedy struck. On December 14th, he stumbled home bleeding from a stab wound to his chest, claiming a stranger had lured him to a park with the promise of information about his mother. He died 3 days later. He was about 21 years old. Authorities investigated, but the evidence was baffling. Some believed Caspar had staged the attack himself, perhaps by accident. Others were convinced he'd been silenced to hide a royal secret. Over the years, countless writers and historians have debated who he really was. DNA analysis in 1996 compared blood samples from his belongings to the Baden royal line. The results were inconclusive. Tests repeated in 2002 also failed to prove or disprove the royal theory. Today, Caspar Hauser's grave still stands in Ansbach. Its inscription reads, "Here lies Caspar Hauser, a riddle of his time." His birth was unknown, his death mysterious. Almost 2 centuries later, the mystery endures. Was he a lost prince, a forgotten child, or simply a young man who became trapped inside a story too big to escape? In the frozen wilderness of northern Canada lies Anjikuni Lake, a remote body of water surrounded by endless spruce forest and tundra. For centuries, Inuit families hunted and fished along its shores. But one winter night in the early 1930s, something happened there that no one could ever explain. According to an RCMP report and several newspaper accounts, a trapper named Joe LaBelle arrived at an Inuit village on Anjikuni Lake seeking shelter. He had visited the community many times before, a thriving settlement of tents and stone huts, known for its warmth and hospitality. This time, the village was silent. Smoke no longer rose from the hearths. Dock sleds sat abandoned near the shoreline. Every hut was empty, as if the people had simply walked away. LaBelle searched the camp and found food still cooking over a long cold fire. Fur clothing, weapons, and provisions were neatly stored. Even the community's prized rifles remained in place, an unthinkable oversight in the Arctic. But there was not a single footprint leading away from the settlement, only the drifting snow. He hurried to a nearby telegraph office and reported what he had found. Within days, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police launched an investigation. When officers arrived, they too found the village deserted. In one graveyard, they noticed something even stranger. Several graves appeared to have been opened, not by animals, but by human hands. The bodies were missing. Mounties searched for miles, following frozen lakes and caribou trails, but no trace of the villagers was ever discovered. Dozens of men, women, and children had simply vanished from one of the most remote places on Earth. As the story spread through Canadian newspapers, theories multiplied. Some believed the entire band had fled because of starvation or illness. Others whispered that northern lights and strange lights in the sky, described that winter by fur traders, might have frightened them away. A few suggested something far darker, that the people of Anjikuni had encountered something no one else ever would. Decades later, skeptics argued that the legend had grown with retelling. Official RCMP archives contain no surviving record of the investigation. Some claim it was lost, others that it never existed. Yet the earliest accounts, published in the Asterisk, Halifax Herald, and Toronto Star, match LaBelle's original description almost exactly. Even modern researchers who doubt the supernatural can't fully dismiss it. How could an entire village disappear in midwinter, leaving behind food, tools, and weapons, the things no Arctic traveler would ever abandon? Today, Anjikuni Lake remains uninhabited. Fishermen who venture there say the nights are unnaturally quiet, the wind carrying a low hum across the frozen water. And sometimes, when the northern lights ripple across the sky, they swear it almost sounds like voices echoing from a village that no longer exists. On a spring morning in 1957, tragedy struck the small town of Hexham, England. Two sisters, 11-year-old Joanna and 6-year-old Jacqueline Pollock, were walking to church when they were hit and killed by a car driven by a distraught local woman. The accident shattered their parents, John and Florence Pollock, who never truly recovered from the loss. A year later, Florence discovered she was pregnant again. Doctors told her she was expecting one child, but in October 1958, she gave birth to twin girls, Jennifer and Jillian. From the beginning, John was convinced the twins were the reincarnation of their older sisters. As the girls grew, strange details began to surface. Jennifer, the younger twin, had birthmarks identical to Jacqueline's, one above the right eye and another on her side. Neither parent had those marks. When the twins were old enough to speak, they began asking for toys that had belonged to Joanna and Jacqueline, toys they had never seen. They recognized places they'd never been, the school their sisters attended, the park where they used to play, and even the church where the accident had happened. One day, as the family walked past a schoolyard, Jillian pointed to it and said, "That's where we used to go." But she had never attended that school. Another time, Jennifer became frightened by a passing car and shouted, "That's the car that killed us." John and Florence were deeply religious and conflicted by what was happening. They hadn't spoken of their deceased daughters in front of the twins, fearing to reopen wounds, yet the girls seemed to know intimate details of their lives. By age 5, the memories began to fade. The twins grew into ordinary, happy children, eventually losing the vivid recollections that had once defined them. But their story had already reached beyond Hexham. Dr. Ian Stevenson, a psychiatrist at the University of Virginia, later investigated the case as part of his decades-long study into children who claimed to remember past lives. He interviewed the Pollock family in detail, concluding that their accounts were consistent and sincere, though he stopped short of calling it proof of reincarnation. Still, he cited it as one of the most compelling cases ever recorded. Skeptics have suggested coincidence or parental influence, but none could explain the physical birthmarks, or how two children could recall names, faces, and events from before they were born. Today, the Pollock twins are often described as the best documented case of reincarnation in the Western world. Both sisters are still alive, though they rarely speak publicly about their childhood. For them, the memories of Joanna and Jacqueline are like distant dreams, faint, familiar, but forever a part of who they are. More than 60 years later, the mystery remains. If the Pollock twins truly carried the memories of lives before, then perhaps, just once, death was not the end, only the beginning of another story. In 1587, more than a century before the Mayflower reached America, a group of English settlers set sail across the Atlantic to establish a new colony on Roanoke Island, a remote patch of land off the coast of what is now North Carolina. Their leader, John White, was an artist and explorer with a vision of building England's first permanent settlement in the New World. Among the group was his daughter, Eleanor Dare, who soon gave birth to a baby girl, Virginia Dare, the first English child born in the Americas. But what began as a hopeful venture quickly turned into one of history's greatest mysteries. Food was scarce, relations with nearby indigenous tribes were tense, and White made the difficult decision to sail back to England for supplies, promising to return quickly. That was in August 1587. He would not see the colony again for 3 years. When John White finally returned in 1590, the island was silent. The houses and fortifications were dismantled, as if carefully taken apart rather than destroyed. There were no graves, no bodies, just emptiness. The only clue left behind was a single word carved into a wooden post: Croatoan. White searched desperately but found no trace of his family or the other 115 men, women, and children who had vanished. He believed Croatoan referred to a nearby island home to friendly, indigenous people who had once helped the settlers, but storms forced his ship back to sea before he could investigate further. He never returned. Over the centuries, countless theories have tried to explain what happened to the Roanoke colonists. Some believe they integrated with local tribes, leaving behind traces in later generations' languages and customs. Others think they were killed in conflicts with hostile groups, or perished trying to sail back to England on their own. There are even legends of a mysterious pale-skinned tribe seen years later along the coast, speaking English words they could not have learned. Modern archaeology has uncovered tantalizing clues, fragments of pottery, European tools and 16th century relics found both on Roanoke Island and Croatoan, now Hatteras Island. But none have provided a definitive answer. What makes the mystery endure is the eerie silence it left behind. No distress message, no record of escape, only that single carved word, Croatoan, weathered into the wood like a whisper from another world. John White never stopped wondering what had become of his daughter and granddaughter. In his final journal entry, he wrote of his grief and guilt. "I departed from them unprovided of comfort and left them in great misery." To this day, no one knows what truly happened to the lost colony of Roanoke. But the story of those vanished settlers still echoes across the Outer Banks, a reminder of how even hope itself can disappear into the wilderness. Thank you for watching Chapman Crime. If you'd like to hear more true stories like these, please like, share, and subscribe. It truly helps keep these forgotten names alive. Until next time, stay curious and stay safe.